Hello everyone, I'm Marc-Andre Ferguson, Product Evangelist for Smoke, and welcome to Smoke Signals. This is a very special episode where I'll be covering a lot of new information for Final Cut Pro editors switching to Smoke. I've put together a sort of training program to help you transition from what you know about Final Cut to what you want to discover about Smoke 2013. I take this from years of experience, both as a Final Cut Pro editor and as an Apple certified trainer, where I taught Final Cut Pro for several years from version 3 up to version 7. This program does not replace the Smoke Learning Channel and all the lessons that Grant K put together. This is more of a switcher's guide to Final Cut Pro 7, so it does not contain all the instructions. You might want to peruse all of these lessons and also probably look at Larry Jordan's Getting Started videos on Smoke 2013. I hope you enjoy this program. Let's start by installing Smoke. There are certain steps that are very important to respect when you do install Smoke. So the first thing to do is make sure that Smoke application is selected. I'm going to continue, type in my password, and then this page is asking you to select media storage device. So basically, this is like your Final Cut Pro scratch disk. One thing that is very important to understand about Smoke is that projects are linked to your media storage. That means if you don't plug in the hard drive that you selected in this page, you won't be able to have access to your projects. So it's very important to select this drive carefully. So you'll see here that I have my MacBook Pro and also my Promise Pegasus RAID. So when you select a media storage device, a folder called Autodesk Media Storage is created at the root level of that drive. So it's very important to understand. So I'll click Continue, and it will install Smoke. So while Smoke is installing, let me explain what the Autodesk Media Storage is. Basically, it's your scratch disk. That means this is where media captured will be captured to, that's where media transcoded will be transcoded to, and that's where all of your rendered effects will be saved. Autodesk Media is saved in a series of individual files, so either uncompressed DPX sequences or individual frames of QuickTime files. The way that the Autodesk Media Storage works depends if you are creating project media when you're importing files or you're working in the native format. That is also the difference between what we call managed or unmanaged media. When you import files and ask for Autodesk to manage the media by clicking on the Create Project Media button in the Media Hub, you're basically asking Smoke to transcode the media into the pre-selected intermediate format and also let Smoke manage the media. So all of your files are transcoded and moved into the Autodesk Media Storage folders. So installation is done. You'll notice that it doesn't add Smoke as an icon to the dock. So I'm going to go ahead into the applications, select the Autodesk folder, go to Smoke 2013 pre-release, and grab 2013 pre-release 1 app and drag it down to my dock. Let's put it at the end over here. Smoke also comes with helpful utilities such as Smoke Setup for configuring your system for working with VTRs, or the Severus Monitor that helps you determine if all the background processes are running smoothly. When you first launch Smoke, you're presented with an end-user license agreement. Once you click Accept, it will bring you to this page, which gives you very important information. First of all, this is the all-new Smoke, and it's still under construction. This is pre-release trial 1. There will be several pre-release trials, but until the release in September, some features are turned off, some features are still being worked on, and some things might change along the way. So make sure that you check back on the area of Smoke forum by clicking over here. And you can also learn how to use Smoke by clicking on this link to bring you to the Smoke Learning Channel with over 30 tutorials that helps you getting started with Smoke 2013. So when you launch Smoke, and every time you will do so, you're presented with this page. You can select or create a project and a user. Basically, Smoke has a login page. When you start a Mac, you're asked to select a user and enter a password. It's the same thing here. Smoke was designed with multiple users in mind. So basically you can have several users selected over here. Anybody used to Avid Media Composer will be familiar with this workflow. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new user. I'll click on a new button. I will name my user. A thing that's very important, you cannot have spaces or special characters in these names. I'm going to select the Smoke FCP7 keyboard shortcut. Basically, Smoke comes with 3 keyboard shortcut presets. The classic Smoke, the new Final Cut Pro 7 inspired Smoke 2013 keyboard shortcut, and Flame keyboard shortcuts. You don't need to select any of these other things over here. Just type in your name, click on Create, and I get a new user, which will be using the Final Cut Pro 7 inspired keyboard shortcuts. I'm now going to create a new project. The first thing you have to do is name this project. I'm going to call this FTP2 Smoke. Setup directory and setup mode, you might not want to touch right now. Just to explain quickly, setups are basically preference sets that are saved with everything. You will find setups in new projects, you will find setups in effects parameters, and you will find setups in Connect Effects trees. Basically, a setup is a group of preferences or a group of parameters that have been adjusted. You can use setups as templates, you can use setups to share effects parameters with other editors, and basically right now, since I don't have anything available, I will just select the untitled setup directory and the new setup mode, because I don't have anything to start with. The config template is the frame rate of the project. If I select a config on the config template, you see you've got several pre-configured presets. For example, I'm going to do a 1920 by 1080 at 2997p configuration. All of these configuration files are basically presets, again, templates that will apply a certain default time base to your project. You can change this on a per sequence basic. It's a little bit like easy setups in Final Cut Pro 7. Just select this over here, then select resolution and bit depth for your project. Let's say, for example, I'm going to go in here and select 1920 by 1080 and all of this, progressive frames. If you have interlace, you can change this over here. I'm going to make my video 10-bit because I have some ProRes footage in there, and I want my sequences to be 10-bit. You can select for imported graphics files to be rendered in 16-bit or 8-bit. And you can select if your rendering is based on a GPU or the CPU. I'm going to leave it to GPU for now. Then you have 2 very important settings to decide. First is the intermediate renders. When you process any kind of effect in Smoke, or you import any file and you ask Smoke to manage the media, all of these will be rendered in a sequence of individual frames. Smoke was designed to be a frame-based compositor, a frame-based system, so it does have a legacy of using uncompressed DPX files as its standard file format. A little bit like Color was when Apple first bought Final Touch. So you could decide to work in uncompressed format, and any process that you make or any file that you import and decide to transcode on import will be converted to a fully uncompressed 10-bit DPX file. On the other hand, if you decide that you want to work in compressed formats, such as one of these ProRes formats, you can go ahead and select one of these. For example, I'm going to work in ProRes 42HQ. Because it's a format that I like. So any of my effects that are rendered will be processed in this way. Or any clip that I import will also be processed as a ProRes 422 file. For example, in Final Cut Pro 7, if you use the log and transfer tool to import P2 or AVCHD material, it will be transcoded to ProRes. The next tab shows you the proxy settings. Proxy settings basically lets you work in a lower resolution version of your files automatically. For example, let's say you're working with RED 5K files. If you decide to turn on proxies and you start importing 5K files, a quarter resolution version of that file will be processed automatically. That means you can work on any of your files at half resolution so that you keep interactivity and speed while you're working, and at any time you can switch from your proxies to your full resolution files. All of your sequence settings, all of your effects parameters will behave just as if it was working on the full resolution file. So it's an extremely powerful workflow if you want to save time and you want to save space. I'm going to turn proxies off for now. So I've selected a time base, I've selected a resolution for my sequence. Again, this is just like an easy setup in Final Cut Pro 7. You can change these settings afterwards, except your time base. But I mean, on the sequence settings, you can change any of these. Intermediate renders are also on a project basis. You cannot change this format afterwards. You can always create a new project. So I'm creating this project. So I now have a project, a 1920 by 1080, and I have a user. I'm going to start smoke. So this is the standard interface. You've got the media library on the left, which is a little bit like in Final Cut Pro 7's browser, which contains bins and sequences. I can have folders and sequences in this media library. When you create a new project, you get a default folder and you get a default sequence, a little bit like Final Cut. To find out what the sequence settings are for a sequence, you can go ahead and press on the / and then click on the sequence. And you get information such as this sequence is 1920 by 1080 at 10-bit, 2997 non-drop frame, and I've got one video track and one audio track. Sequence settings cannot be changed. I can create a new folder either by right-clicking on the folder over here and creating a new folder. And I get this folder over here that I'm going to call media, for example. I can go ahead and move it out if I want, just by dragging it over to the media library folder over here into my root folder, or drag it back into a folder like this. So folders are basically bins. You can put anything you want in them: clips, audios, and sequences. I could also go down to the gear menu over here and create a new folder. Sequences are created the same way. I can right-click on a folder and create new sequence, and I get sequence settings. I can name my sequence such as, smoke to, smoke to FCP. I can decide the number of video tracks, the resolution. The stereo button here asks me if I want to do a stereoscopic 3D track, which we will not cover in this tutorial. But this is the way that you would create a stereo track. Bit depth, scan format, frame rate. Let's make this drop frame, 2997 drop frame. And you can give it a default duration. The start time code over here, let's have this start at 10. Enter. And let's give this a duration of 5 minutes. I'm pressing the comma key just like I do in Final Cut Pro, just to insert a pair of zeros. Enter this. I'm going to give 2 stereo audio tracks because I know I've got live audio and music to import in here. Let's say I want to import some media. I can go ahead and right-click on my media folder and select import, or do the same from the file import menu, or directly click on the media hub down here. Once I click on the tab, and I can browse my local Macs, my local storage, also anything on my network. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my Promise Pegasus. I've got some events over here. I've got Final Cut Pro documents, for example. I can go into my Capture Scratch and go into my Costa Rica folder and let it browse, and it will basically look up everything that I've got in this folder. So the Media Hub behaves a little bit like a cross between the Finder's import window and the log and transfer window in Final Cut Pro 7. You can look at image sequences as a clip. You can look at different kinds of media as a clip. You can do selects. You can do subclips before you import, mark ins and outs, peruse footage. So it's a lot more powerful than just using the Finder to select some clips. And you can also do some transformations before you start importing anything. So I have clips over here, for example. Look at this airport clip. I double click on it. I get this little preview here, and I can do some playback. I can play back, I can mark in and out points. So basically use the I and O key to do any kind of marking. I get some information about the clip itself. So this is QuickTime 1920 by 1080 at 10-bit, the frame rate. I go to metadata. I get more information such as where this file is, what the compressor is. This is pure ProRes 422 because this was imported from an AVC HD consumer codec, which I previously transcoded as ProRes in Final Cut. So you can go ahead and peruse any of these files and decide to import that. So import is very straightforward. I can go ahead and select this clip, drag it over to the folder that I want, for example, or I could select this clip over here and click on the import button down here, and it gets imported into the selected folder again. Let's look at this frog, for example. I can go ahead and do some transformations. If you look down here at the general import options, there are two very important buttons. There's Create Multi-Channel Clip and there's Create Project Media. Create Project Media will enable a managed copy of the media in the application storage, as it says in this little blue box. Basically, this will determine if Smoke will manage the media itself or you will manage the media. When you import files in Final Cut Pro, they are left at their location, and you get a link to that file in your browser. It's the same thing with Smoke. I imported these files over here without selecting this Project Media option, so that means they are still exactly where they were before. They're on my Promise Pegasus RAID in Final Cut Pro documents in Capture Scratch in Costa Rica. So if I move these files from outside, if I move these files out of this Costa Rica folder, these guys will go offline. So it's the same thing in Final Cut. If, on the other hand, I decided I want Smoke to manage my media, I can click on Create Project Media and drag any of these files over, and two things will happen. First, that ProRes file is actually imported into the media folder, but a background task is automatically started. If I go to my Jobs menu over here, this file is being transcoded as my previously selected format. If I go back to the General tab, you'll see that my previously selected media compression format was ProRes 422 HQ. So this file is actually being transcoded as a ProRes 422 series of images, and that's what will be used in Smoke. So my original Costa Rica 137 file is not touched, it's not moved, it's still in my Promise Pegasus storage, but the transcoded version of this is moved into my Autodesk Media Storage folder. So it's very important to understand the difference between having managed media and unmanaged media. And this is the button that will basically let you select what happens when you import media. Also, you always keep a direct link to the original file. So let's say I did click on Create Project Media, I did import this file, and I'm using this version, this transcoded version of the file. At any point in time, I can always link back to the original media, which is very useful, for example, if you're working with RE files or you're working with RED files where you transcoded footage on import, so you could actually work in a compressed format, but at one point you want to use the full uncompressed version of this. Well, you can always do that. In this case, I actually don't want to create project media because the media that I'm importing is actually smaller in file size than ProRes 422 HQ because I transcoded this original AVC HD footage in ProRes 422 regular. So I'm going to deselect project media. Create multi-channel clip actually lets me import alpha channel information, audio files, all of this. Basically, this will wrap all of the other channels, such as OpenEXR sequence, into one single clip in my media library. So it's useful if, for example, if you're importing animation QuickTime files with a built-in alpha channel or ProRes 4x4 QuickTime files with an alpha channel, and you won't get two separate files. You'll get one file with a second channel, which is the alpha channel. Let's go over to my format specific options. You can change some of these options over here. So a little bit like in log and transfer, where you can basically select how a P2 file will be imported or how a red file will be imported, how it's going to be transcoded, and what look will be applied to it on import. You can actually select to change some of this information. For example, I've got a QuickTime file selected, so it says QuickTime over here. I can change clip options, I can change image options, I can change metadata options for QuickTime files. Let's move over to some red files. Over here, I've got red files that we shot for NAB, and I've got my tile on a green screen. And down here, you can see I've got R3D specific format settings. I can change, for example, flip settings, timecode selection, use edge code or time of day on import if I want to. I could load R3D settings. I can go into my debayering settings over here and select to debayer either quarter, half good, premium. Any of the red options are actually available down here. If I go to color, I can then select if I'm going to use the color science used in camera or any of the other familiar R3D settings. All of these format specific options can be applied on a group of files or on individual files. And these settings are actually saved on a file per file basis, meaning you can always come back and change these settings after import if you want. I'm actually going to select Create Project Media for this because I don't want to work with a 5K epic file. I actually want to work with a ProRes 422 file. So when I drag this over here onto Media, I will actually start a debayering job, which will take a while because it's a 5K file. So debayering is happening in the background. I can actually start working right away with this file, and as soon as frames are available in my proper format, they are available in my timeline. If you've done any work in Final Cut Pro 10, this is the exact same principle. When you import media in Final Cut Pro 10, you're asked if you want to optimize media for your sequence, and that will create a ProRes copy of whatever it is that you were importing. And the file, as soon as the transcoded file is available, it replaces the file wherever you're working with it in your timeline. I'm going to go ahead and import a Final Cut Pro 7 XML. I'm going to go to my bookmarks because you can't create bookmarks in a Media Hub, and I go to this Thompson folder, which is a project by one of our clients called Delicious Edit, who created this corporate video for Thomson Airlines for the launch of the 787 Dreamliner. So I've got a bunch of footage in here, QuickTime files and QuickTime files of different formats, different frame rates, different bit depth, green screen that I will want to be redoing in Smoke, and I have the XML over here. I'm going to turn off Create Project Media because that's not what I want to. I'm going to create a new folder over here, new folder, and I'll call this Thompson. And although, yeah, the tools in the pre-release 1 version of the Smoke trial are very limited, you can import Final Cut Pro 7 XML files, Final Cut Pro 10 XML files, and Avid Media Composer AAFs. You can even export an AAF from Adobe Premiere and import that. The easiest way to do this is to simply take the clip. This is the XML file itself, and I'm going to drag and drop it over to my folder. Now look down here, it's importing the XML file, it's searching for the 52 sources, it found the sources, and it's importing this and recreating my timeline. I'm going to open up the folder, and I get one file, which is basically the timeline itself. Double click on the timeline, and here I am, and everything here is present. I have some effects that need rendering, resize issues, and this kind of stuff, but basically this is how it works. Let me give you a trick. When you want to import an XML file or an AAF file into Smoke, make sure that it's close to the media that's related to this XML. So basically, I'm in my Thompson folder, I've got the XML file amongst all the QuickTime files and the JPEGs and all of that, so it's easier for Smoke to find it. You might also want to put the XML file one folder above. Just don't put it at the root of your RAID, for example, because Smoke will just start looking in every single folder trying to find all of these files. put the XML file or the EAF file as close to the media as possible. Not necessarily in the same folder, but close to it. I want you to notice that you can right-click on a lot of things. I can right-click on this sequence, for example, and I'll get this menu that lets me copy, paste, and select and deselect and all that good stuff. Right-click on an empty folder or right-click on a full folder, import and export material, create new folders and sequences. I can create color bars and color sources, just like the generators menu in Final Cut Pro. Incidentally, generators are also available in the clip menu under the Generate subcategory. I can also right-click on segments in the timeline, for example, and add effects or remove effects, contain selections, and group segments together. I can rename segments in the timeline. Notice that when I select a segment, it pops open the effects pipeline, which basically tells me all of the effects that have been applied to this particular segment. For example, this fish clip over here has a resize effect applied to it and a color corrector applied to it. So I can do several things with the parameters over here. Basically, as you notice, when I bring my cursor over to one of these parameters, like the gain, for example, if I click on the left mouse button and drag left and right, I'm actually applying gain smoothly like this. If you press the middle mouse button, if you've got a 3-button mouse, you can actually go faster. So this changes my parameters a little more drastically. If I want to reset parameters, I option click on the setting itself, and it brings it back to its default setting. I can create a sequence by right-clicking on one of these folders or right-clicking in the empty area and making a new sequence like this. And I get my sequence options. Notice that you cannot change any of these options afterwards. In Final Cut Pro, you could bring up the sequence settings menu and change or modify any of these settings. In this version of Smoke, you cannot do this. So if you create a sequence and change your mind, basically what you can do is just delete your sequence like so and create a new one. So I'm going to create a new sequence. I'm actually going to make this 25p. Just for kicks, and create it, and I get a 25p sequence. Again, if I press the / key and click on my sequence, I get the sequence settings like this, but you cannot modify these settings after creating it. To open clips or source clips in the left viewport, instead of double clicking, you only need to single click on a clip. And it is opened in the viewport. I can go ahead and play it back. I can scrub. I can mark in and out points just by clicking on this button over here. Mark in, mark out. You get a duration. You can add markers. You can zoom in on this image like so. Well, these viewers are dynamic. That's a sad frame for her. Sorry. And I can dynamically resize images like my viewports like this. I can even go full screen if I want, just by clicking on these 2 little arrows. Notice down here, I can navigate between all the clips that I have in the current folder. So I can move over here. This is a sequence. This is another source clip. And this is my little Costa Rican frog. I've got one source loaded here on my left viewport. And basically, you can add markers just by clicking on the mark button over here. And you get this little name box that you can change and call this, for example, ants. And you can change the color of the marker by selecting a color in the color pot, like this. All right, my move away, the timeline indicator, I've got my marker over here. I can add another marker anywhere like this by clicking mark again, or I could press the M key to add a marker. If let's call this ants 2, for example, you can move between markers just by clicking the shift key and the up and down arrow. So shift up and shift down moves between markers like this. You can remove markers by right clicking on them and selecting delete markers, or I can also click option M. Shift up to move to my previous marker, option M to remove it. Subclipping is likewise very straightforward. In Smoke, I can go ahead and select any portion of this clip. For example, when this ant comes into frame, right before it, I mark an in point with I, and as soon as it leaves, or actually when the second ant leaves, O to mark out, and go to the clip menu, create subclip. It's Command U for shortcut, just like in Final Cut, and it will create a subclip of my Costa Rica 1:240 clip right here, which has the correct length. By the way, you will notice that in the file menu, there's no save option. Everything in Smoke is auto-saved automatically. In the preferences menu, you can select how often this is saved or not. And as soon as you quit Smoke, everything is also force auto-saved. All of these clips are from a trip to Costa Rica. If I press the forward clip, / button and click on the clip, I see that this is 1920 by 1080, 10-bit ProRes files, 2397. Actually, I know that these are ProRes files because I transcoded them. So I'm going to right click on my Costa Rica folder, create a new sequence that I will call Costa Rica, and make sure that I've got the proper settings, 2398, where is it? Right here, and one stereo track, and start time code at 10 o'clock, because of my broadcast days, I love 10 o'clock, and make this timeline a default of 10 minutes, for example. Obviously, this is just a default setting. Your timeline won't cut short at 10 minutes. If you go over, it's basically just an indicator. So I create this new timeline, and it's automatically loaded down here as a tab, and I've got my Costa Rica timeline over here. So the way that you edit clips into a timeline in Smoke is very similar to other editing applications. You've got a patch panel on the left here that basically lets me patch video and audio, just like you'd find in Final Cut. You can just click on these little icons over here to connect or disconnect tracks. Let's say I don't want the audio to be included, as is the case for this, because I did not have a very good microphone. I'm just going to disconnect the audio. You can mute tracks, you can lock tracks, and basically this is the basics of patching. Also, when you right click on tracks, you can add video tracks, you can add audio tracks, and you can add versions. Without getting into too much details, versions are basically a special kind of video track that lets you edit other versions of your edit in the version track, and by using split screen tools, you can basically go from one version of your edit to the other. So imagine having two sequences superimposed one on top of the other. So it's just like a track, but you can basically turn the entire version off. So let's talk about editing. I'll do a little edit over here. I'm going to select this, in and out points, and I can insert and overwrite using these buttons, just like in Final Cut, or I could use F9 and F10. So F9 inserts and F10 overwrites. Command plus and minus will let you zoom in and out. You can also click on this little slider over here and click and drag it up and down to zoom in and out. Up and down arrow keys will move from the beginning to the end of a segment, so you can go from cut to cut in your timeline very, very simply. I'm going to add a few more clips like this, and overwrite this guy over here, and let's pick this other clip over here, like so. Overwrite. So again, in up and down arrow key, I can move from cut to cut just like you would do in Final Cut. If I press the home key, I go to the beginning or the end of my timeline. My timeline being 10 minutes long, I actually have this little problem here. What I could have done is to set my duration to 1 frame, and basically the timeline would just stretch to the correct duration. Notice this little yellow bar over here, which is called the focus point. So the focus point is a little bit like the monitoring tools in Avid Media Composer, but also a way to patch different things. Let's say that I want to superimpose this shot, for example, on V2, which is non-existent for now. I can go ahead and right-click and add a video track. And I'm going to go ahead and select this segment and press the X key because I want to mark this clip. So the X key works just like in Final Cut, mark clip. And notice that as I move the focus point up and down, I'm actually selecting which track this little clip over here will be inserted on. So if I overwrite this clip, I actually get this second clip on top of the first one. Also, since I had a mark in, a mark out point, and a mark in and mark out point in my timeline, it actually automatically added a time warp effect to this. I don't want a time warp effect, so I just select it and click on delete. And now it just trimmed the end frames. So I could go ahead and use a blend tool, for example, to overwrite this onto this one, or a picture-in-picture effect, that kind of stuff. Moving clips around is very simple. You've got selection tools over here with shortcuts that resemble Final Cut. So the select tool is A and is used just like Final Cut Pro 7. You can slip and slide tools, and we will discuss slide cuts and slide keyframes in a bit. So once I have my select tool selected, I can click on this clip over here, drag it left and right, obviously, and it tells me where I'm going to drop it and how many frames it's being moved. Like so. Very simple. All right. Notice that snap is off. I can actually turn snapping back on like this, and snap works just like in Final Cut. It will snap to whatever. So cuts, beginning cuts like this, and I can snap it over to the positioner. If I drag a clip over and the track is non-existent, it will actually create a brand new track. If you start dragging a segment around like so and snapping doesn't happen to be on, you can do like Final Cut and basically turn it on temporarily while you're moving something just by pressing the Shift key. So notice that I hold down a Shift key and snap is turned on. So let go of the Shift key, snap is now turned off. The hotkey, the keyboard shortcut to turn snapping on and off is N, just like in Final Cut Pro. Snap. We're going to copy and paste segments, and for this I will show you a bunch of different tools that are available in Smoke, and the whole operation is a little different from what you'd find in Final Cut Pro, but still familiar. So for example, I've got this one clip on V2 that I'm going to copy and paste. So I could right click and select copy, or I can also press Command C, move over to where I want it, and press Command V, and voila, the clip is pasted as usual. Now, undo this, Command Z. I'm going to turn ripple on, all right? Now notice what happens, for example, when I select a clip on V1, copy it. Actually, let me bring down the focus point to V1 because this is important, because this determines where clips will be pasted. I'm going to copy this, I'm going to move over to this cut, and I'm going to paste it. Command V, and since ripple is on, everything gets pushed downstream. So copy and paste uses the ripple function on the track, on the destination track only. So for example, I will undo this, I will turn ripple off, copy this clip again, I will paste it, and the clip gets overwritten over the previous clip. Because ripple was off, it actually turns into a overwrite operation. So now let's look at this little tool over here. I'm going to go and select the clip on V2. All right, and I also move my focus point over to V2. I select it, and I want to move it over here. I'm going to turn on ripple, but you know, if I paste it on V2, there's nothing to the right, so nothing happens because there's nothing to push over. So what if I want to paste it on V2, but move everything beneath it over by the same in the same manner? So I'm going to turn on this little tool over here that says affect this track with the ripple operation. So now if I ripple, the clip on V1 is actually moved over by the same length of the pasted clip. So this is like your auto select tool in Final Cut Pro, a cross between that and the active track button in Avid Media Composer. So if you're doing copy and pasting operations or you're doing insert operations, this little arrow determines if the track will be affected by the rippling operation. Just by using the selection tool, you can do the same kind of trimming that you do in Final Cut Pro. For example, I can click on the end of a clip like this and basically drag left and right, and notice the amount of handles that this clip has, 116 frames, for example. This is the amount of handles that I'm affecting. If I click on a cut and start trimming, I'm actually doing a roll edit. So with the selection tool, this is how you do your roll edits. Just click on the cut, drag left and right. If I actually click on the left side or the right side of cut like this, I create a gap, just like what happens with the selection tool in Final Cut Pro. I'll undo this. I'll turn on ripple. So once you turn on ripple, you're actually using the ripple tool. So if I click on the left side, notice that I have 114 frames of handles. I click on the left side and drag to the left. I'm actually rippling this track. Same thing on the right side over here, like so. So we now just covered ripple, roll, and selection tool. If I'll turn off ripple for now, and if you go into my the cursor menu, you can see that I have slip, slide, and slide cuts. So slip and slide are, self-explanatory. I click on this segment, and I can drag it left and right, and basically slip it. So notice that the video is changing, and also the amount of handles is changing. If I change to the slide tool functions just like you'd expect it to. So I'm actually making the left clip smaller or shorter, and the right clip longer. Slide cuts is unique to Smoke. It's like a cross between replace and slide. So notice this frame, notice the position of the trees. Let's just make this a little bit bigger. Slide cuts, if I click on the clip, notice the handles now. I'm actually sliding and slipping at the same time. So the frame that is present will stay the same the whole time. So I'm actually not only slipping the content of my clip, but also sliding it left and right. So the selected frame stays the same the whole time. So I'm I moved the clip over left and right, but I also changed the content so that this frame doesn't change. So that's slide cuts. To add a transition between segments in the timeline, just make sure that you've got nothing selected and that you are also on a cut. Now notice this little icon over here appears if my positioner is on a cut. So if I go to the beginning and I click on the transition button, I get a choice between a wipe, a dissolve, and an axis effect. So what I'm going to do is simply add a straight dissolve. Click on the dissolve button, and you get the dissolve information here in the effects pipeline. So basically, I've got black on the left side, I have my dissolve, and I've got my result. I can select to have my dissolve start at the cut or end at the cut or centered. Now I'm fading up from black, so I do want to start from the cut. And I see that the default dissolve is 10 frames long. So I can click and drag on this numerical value like this, like you can do in most numerical values in Smoke, or I could click on it and I get the calculator, and the calculator is the way to enter data in numerical fields, and so it's a 1 second dissolved, hence 24 frames because my timeline is 24p, so I want a 1 second dissolve. I can go to the next cut but just by pressing the down arrow key, and I could again just select the transition button, or I could select this transition over here, copy it by pressing Command C, and then paste it again. Select my cut over here and paste it. Now it's pasted over here. I can select to have it centered on my cut, like so. I actually don't have enough handles over here. As you can see, my I've got 0 handles, so the dissolve is actually too short. So what I'm going to do is make it longer. You can make your dissolves longer or shorter just by dragging and clicking on them. You can actually also move them around like this. So if you want to center them on a cut at a specific frame, you can move them left and right. One other cool trick is that you can actually copy and paste transitions to several segments at once. So I'm going to copy, Command C, and then select this one cut and Command click to select a second cut, Command V, and I get my dissolve added to 2 clips at the same time. So that's a kind of a neat trick. To modify your transition, you just click on it to make sure that it's selected, and you can apply any kind of changes over here, make this an additive dissolve, an inverse additive dissolve, etc., etc. You can dissolve to color from color. You can also delete dissolve by pressing the delete key over here. And you can also do like a lot of other areas in Smoke. You can click on a segment and drag it down, and it gets recycled. To add a timeline effect, there's no effect menu in Smoke. They're actually all in this little button over here. So if I press the effects button, I can not only jump to connect effects, but I can also apply one of these basic effects. So time warps are for freeze frames and speed changes, variable and constant speed changes. Resizes are usually used when you import when you put a clip in a timeline that's not the same size as the timeline itself. You can add basic text by using the text timeline effects, color correction, sparks or plugins to be announced, blends and wipes. Wipes actually let you use the garbage mask tool on segments, and the axis effect is our super tool. So it's the repositioner, but it also has the trackers, the keyers, and the garbage masking tools built in. So axis is like our super tool. Let's add a simple color correction. So I will select this one clip. I can either click on the effects button, or I can right click on a segment and say add effect. When you add an effect after selecting a clip in a segment in a timeline, I get this menu again, which is called the ribbon. I'm going to add a color correction clip, a color correction effect, and the pipeline lights up with my color correction tool and the basic parameters that I can apply to this segment. I will not go into the advanced editor. I just want to demonstrate how you can apply effects, remove effects. So just like you'd open up a clip in from the timeline in Final Cut Pro 7, go to the effects tab and look at effects. This is the same thing. I'm basically looking at my segment, and these are the effects that are applied to the selected segment. There's only one effect right now. If I add a second effect, for example, axis, so I've got a color correction and an axis effect applied to this one segment. Notice that the little blue indicator says that not only is the effect applied, it is also turned on. You can mute effects, just like you turn off an effect temporarily in Final Cut Pro. Also notice the little tab on the side here, because these can be moved around and copied and pasted and also trashed. So I can drag it and bring it below to the bottom of the screen and it disappears. Let me just undo this. So I bring my axis back. I'm actually going to turn it on, and I've got my parameters. Let's select the color correction parameters. Let's just lower the saturation a bit, and I'm going to raise the gain, and I'm going to make this more red just for kicks. All right, like this. So a very, very simple color correction. I could go ahead into the color correction editor. This is not the point. I want to show you that you can copy and paste effects very simply. Just like you do in Final Cut, you can actually click on the effect and drag it over to another segment. Let's say I want to apply it to the third segment in my timeline. You can see that I now have the color correction applied to this segment. All right. So let me undo this, go back to the first segment. Now notice that if I select a clip, I get the selected clips effects over here. If I move my timeline positioner, I still see the selected segments effects over here. So make sure that if you want to modify settings on another segment, make sure you select the correct segment. So this segment over here doesn't have any effects applied. So if I select the first segment, and right click on it, you can see I can copy and paste. I can actually just copy, and I'm going to click over here and click paste effects. I get both effects applied. All right, undo this, go back to my first segment. I'm only going to select the color correction effect, and I'm going to right click on it, copy, and I can click on this segment over here and say paste the previous selected effect, which happened to be color correct. So I can paste just the color correct effect like this. Or again, I could also just go back to my first segment, just drag the color correction effect and drop it onto my third segment. So several ways to copy and paste either individual effects or the whole series of effects that you'll find in the effect pipeline. To remove effects, select a segment you want to remove the effect from and either select the effect and click delete, or go to a segment like this, which has multiple effects. I can right click on the segment and say remove all effects. And then all of the effects are removed from the effect pipeline. Notice the little dots on the top here. The little dots tell me that there is an effect and it needs to be rendered. So there are no separate colors like you'd find in Final Cut Pro. Basically, you've got these dots that say some of the frames have been rendered. Why? Because every time that you move your positioner around, the frame that you're parked on actually gets rendered. So when you will render this whole segment, it will actually skip over the frames that are already rendered. So if I select this clip over here and I press the render button, it starts rendering, and rendering is pretty fast, again, depending on the speed of your machine. And it says that it's got 82 frames to go, and I get a solid black bar telling me that the rendering is complete. Let's just play this back. There we go. So I just rendered the effect. Another way to do this would be to select the whole track and render all the effects on this track. So I can basically just click on the track itself. Notice that everything gets highlighted on this particular track and press the render button, or go to the gear menu and select all tracks. See, the command is Shift Command A. All the tracks get selected. I can press on the render button and everything gets rendered. So I've got 299 frames left to render because this segment is pretty long. It will take about 14 seconds and all of these frames are rendered. So you might be wondering what's happening, what's going on? Well, all of these clips are being rendered using the intermediate format that was selected when I created my project. In this case, I'm rendering files out as ProRes HQ files, and all of these are being rendered into my pre-designated Autodesk Media Storage folder. I hope you enjoyed these lessons. If you have questions or comments about this program or would like me to produce some more training content like this, go ahead and post comments right here on Facebook or on the area forum for Smoke 2013. I'm Marc-Andre Ferguson. Thank you for watching.